We all know that one day we're going to die. But do we actually live as though we know we're going to die? Most of us try not to think about it, avoid talking about it, and don't really even want to know about it, even when that moment is drawing near for ourselves or those we love. Our guest today is known, revered, and in some places feared for his deep commitment to relanguaging, befriending, and guiding the path of death. Subject of the film Grief Walker, author of the book Die Wise, Stephen Jenkinson is here with us at Uplift Central today. Welcome, Stephen. What stops us from talking about death?
Well, I do. So you can exclude me from that and sound like you do too. So it's the great unwashed mass who's listening. You know, I'm not sure that's actually the dilemma. We're both kind of alert to the culture enough to know that the death yammer is on the rise. And so, what would you expect? You would expect things inherently to improve if people are talking about dying, as they surely are now. And this would only be true if the problem all along has been that, quote, we weren't talking about it, now we are, so we've turned the corner. If that were true, good death would be abounding, and death literacy, but deep literacy. I'm not talking about ABCs. A literacy of the soul, I guess. This would be in the offing by virtue of, we got death sections in the bookstore now, for crying out loud. Of course, in the self-help section, which defeats the whole thing. But of course, these days, I guess self-help is the bookstore with investment strategy as the side light, and that's it. There's nothing else. So I don't think the problem ever was that we weren't, quote, talking about dying. That's a cover story for what was really going on. I think the dilemma was, and has always been, and remains, what are we saying when we talk about dying? What's the language that's being used? A death-phobic culture does not ignore dying. A death-phobic culture makes a silo for it to sit and to be domesticated and turned into a lapdog. That's what a death-phobic culture does. So realizing the alacrity that a death-phobic culture exerts upon dying is to recognize that the principal habits of the mind and the psyche are always manifest in the language. So if you attend to the language, you're not thrown too far off the real scent of what's going on. For example, the grotesque euphemization of dying in a culture that's allegedly speaking more and more about it all the time. If you really attend to the language, the word die doesn't appear very often. Death, even less, and dead, hardly at all. Of course, euphemism is where perfectly healthy words go to die. That's what it is. And, I've often pointed out that the verb to euphemize, though I don't think it's in the dictionary, but it should be, sounds so much like euthanize. Because that's what happens in language where the realities of dying are the first casualty or the first sacrifice made in the name of giving it airtime. This is the great poverty. It's the particular poverty of a consumer culture awash in material goods. From the outside, it doesn't look like poverty because we got more stuff than we can ever employ. But of course, the poverty is we don't know from whence it comes. We don't know how to use it, and there's way too much to use. None of it was crafted with the realities and the current needs of life in mind. And it's the same with the language around dying. None of it is crafted with the realities of dying appearing in the language. I can attest to this. I was with more than 1,000 people who died. Doesn't make me any kind of an expert in and of itself, but I saw more death than most people in combat ever see. I'm telling you that the first casualty of dying is the language of dying in a culture that doesn't believe in dying anyway. What's wrong with the good old industrial strength words that begin with D that are virtually never employed? You work backwards from that, from the euphemizing, then you begin to get an idea what kind of campaign is underway, which is to see to it that even dying can be user-friendly.
When we first started talking, you were sharing about wonder as a practice. How does this relate to the passage from this life into the beyond? for people that are experiencing it or for people that are the carers and lovers of?
Dying is not something you experience. If you are on the receiving end of your own dying, you are nowhere to be found. The verb to die, try to use it in the passive voice of a sentence as if you were on the receiving end of dying. Try as you might, you won't be able to do it. Because in the English language, the proper grammar says the dying can only be used in the active voice. You actually can't do it any other way. So there is some kind of inchoate genius in this mutt, this mongrel called the English language, that says dying is what you do. It's not what happens to you. You can't even say it in a sentence. It's not an experience, you see. It's something you perform. Your dying is entrusted to you. The question is, what shall you do with this garden that has been entrusted to you? So my plea is to craft a language wherein the deep, mysterious morality play, which is dying, appears before us and does not oblige us to collapse into certainty about any of it. It is a mystery, okay? Dying is a deity. From everything I've been able to tell, that's what it comes to. And deities, by their job description, are slippery characters who aren't housebroken, who don't obey the rules, who don't sit in a corner quietly waiting for you to experience them, or even to call upon them, you see. So the question of your engagement with the deity comes down to a question of what? Some kind of elegant etiquette. The question is not what does dying do to you. The question is what does it ask of you? Okay? And it's not endurance because it's not a trauma. Dying asks of you the willingness to learn endings. You had a chance in the fullness of your days to practice. You could have practiced with all the dying of all the people who died before you. But the only way you could have done it is to attend to them, a kind of unvanquished alertness to the endings around you. This is what confers upon you the beginnings of a realization that to be a deeply tethered human being, and in that sense an achieved human being, requires that you befriend endings. I use the word befriend here deliberately. I do not mean domesticate. I mean befriend. You know the old greater love hath no man quote from the Bible? Let me elaborate ever so slightly and say, could it not be that the real mark of an accomplished human friendship is the willingness to risk the friendship itself for the sake of the friend? So you act in a deeply friendly fashion, and the chances are good, particularly if you're trafficking in candor, that the friendship itself will not survive your act of friendship. The depths of your willingness to proceed in that way confirm the inherent dignity of friendship, though your particular friendship did not survive. Well, okay, marriages go on the rocks all the time for virtually the same reason. So when I say befriend death, what I mean by that is our obligation is to know death well, be useful when it comes, craft a language wherein your dying can recognize itself and is not groping for some kind of foothold. Little example, patient's 28 years old, never going to see 29. I asked what's happening. She said, I'm sick, but I don't let it be a big part of my life. If dying were an animate being, and that's the way you were with it, what do you think the consequences are for your dying? Not for you, for your dying. To say you're no big deal when it's all that's left to you. Does this sound life-affirming? But in a culture that doesn't tolerate endings, that's exactly what it's become. And the degree to which you are not willing to accede to endings is the degree, apparently, to which you get it. I'm not interested in a world where people don't know how to end.
How do we befriend ending? What does a befriended ending look like? Can you give us an example?
One that's not fatal, you mean? Yeah.
Or,
So a practice run?
yeah, give us a practice.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
We don't have to do it right here.
No. If you've ever been divorced,
No.
that's as close to death as you can get. The degree of radical ending. Well, here's why it's so exquisitely what you're asking for right now. The unsought miracle of romance is it mysteriously takes two people to say yes, for it to burst into bloom. It takes one person to execute it. And there's something about the deep arbitrariness of that is so violating at first that you can barely survive it. It literally takes your breath away. What happened to we? What happened to us? Well, that's good practice. It's not practice for hardening your heart so it never happens again. What it's practice for is to realize that it's a convention to imagine that you get a vote on every important thing in your life. It's pure conceit. And conceit simply means it's an idea that you bring that crowds out the realities of the place you plant your idea. So that's all you have, you see. You do not get a vote on what human beings are called upon to be able to understand and to live through and at sometimes endure. Samuel Beckett said it better than I ever could. He's written a book. Frankly, the book's impenetrable, but the title is brilliant. His title is I Can't Go On, I'll Go On. No punctuation, no commas, no nothing. Just examine it for a second. What's the first part he says? I can't go on. In the West, that's deemed to be a failure of the will. But if you've been alive for longer than 18 or 20 years, you know there's such a thing as I can't go on. And it's not a temporary condition. It's true when it's true. And for you to debate it is for you to be a lunatic. And it's absolutely legitimate that when those times come upon you, you recognize them as such. No? Absolutely. What's the rest of his book title? I'll Go On. He does not say, I can't go on yet, I'll go on, still I'll go on, but I'll go on. In other words, this is a blueprint for the very thing you're asking of me now. What's an example? An example is that there will be times in your life that you will go on not being able to. And they're both true at the same time. That's befriending endings. That you have no obligation to be hopeful that what's happening is not happening in order to be able to be useful and a grown-up and to be able to proceed. You have to be able to proceed free of hope. And that's what makes you trustworthy to somebody half your age who, unbeknownst to you, is watching you. And that's the makings of an elder. To go on not being able to, knowing that they're both true and testifying to both of them.
How do we support or engage with or participate with someone who is at that place of, I can't go on, I'm going on?
Well, you don't cheerlead them out of it. Dying people routinely are surrounded by lunatic cheerleaders, otherwise known as the family. A dying person has no obligation to not die because nobody's ready for it, or because nobody's found the language, or because Buddy can't fly in from Baltimore in time. A dying person's deepest obligation is to dying as if dying were a being, you see, that is to be held in very high esteem. Not exactly obeyed, but learned, not to be outfoxed, but to be befriended, as I said earlier. Our responsibility is to recognize that every death before ours is our chance to get it right. That's your PhD in the way it is. Everything you hold dear, its lifespan will not be extended by a moment by virtue of you holding it dear. It's the endings that gain in prestige, not you. The endings. Faithful servant unto the ending of days is a proper job description for an initiated human being.
My own father-in-law passed away a couple of years ago, and his ending was quite sudden and unexpected. and we had a couple of weeks with him between when he was diagnosed and when he passed. And I remember specifically for myself, there was a couple of moments where I was looking around at the family and I was looking at him, and I was feeling whatever I was feeling in the moment. And I can remember feeling like, wow, there is so much magic here. There's so much magic. Like there was so much leveling of conflict and of disputes that were once thought significant. There is so much coming together and wordless embracing in places where there were walls. There's like so much magic that is happening from this one single moment that if you took away our interpretation of that moment being wrong, or that this is actually just a miraculous moment. But at the same time, a feeling that I felt in a way almost guilty for even having that feeling, because I was also deeply conflicted about my father-in-law passing.
And should it take this to get there?
Yeah, that's right. So I guess my question is, how do we get there? Can we get there here, now, without an ending? And how do we allow ourselves to be there in, like, wholeheartedly in our endings?
It's fascinating. You're asking me only how-to questions. How do we make it better? How do we be okay? How do we get it right?
That's a good observation.
Yeah. And my answer chronically has been, learn the poverty. Learn the poverty of your time. That's how. If you don't learn the poverty of your time, every fix you come up with enshrines the poverty inadvertently, because every solution you come up with carries the germ of the thing you think you're solving, you see?
Yeah.
You have to learn the poverty first, not as penance, but as discipline. So use the word miracle. So maybe we could end with this. For what it's worth, though miracles are not my stock in trade, in my time in the death trade, almost uniformly, miracles were understood to be as follows. My loved one is dying. If there's such a thing as miracles, then whoever's in charge will press pause on the natural order of things, tear it from sternum to pubic bone, wide open, reach inside the natural order of things which has been stilled, seize my dying loved one from it, release its grip on it, place my dying loved one safely beside me, and reconstitute the natural order of things and let it go its merry way, minus my person. That's what a miracle tends to be. I take my cue from, it's a little pompous, I suppose, from the great beyond. Here's what I've learned from them. Do you know what their miracle seems to be? The natural order of things. I look in vain for any sign that it is godly, that the gods subvert the natural order of things in order to save it. If that's what they did, you tell me how to understand Auschwitz. You tell me how to understand global warming when so many people are trying to rise against it and don't know how to change what's already in the works. And a million other examples, petty and horrific and everything in between. I look around, I don't think this is a recipe for a deus ex machina, for a God outside the machine. I think this is proof of what deep divinity does, which is it does not subvert what it loves in the name of loving it. It loves it unto its ending, if that's what we're talking about. So miraculous is the willingness to see down what you hold dear when it's its turn, and when you're burdened and privileged enough to be there. And that's what makes you a grown-up. And when somebody 1/3 your age comes around and asks you a deep question when you're in your dotage about what does one do in a troubled time, you have something to answer, because you earned the right to be asked, 40 years down the road. And it's endings, not only endings, but it's endings that are a faithful teacher, that our understanding of compassion is extraordinarily limited and very focused on feeling okay at the end of it. Whereas I look around at compassion of the divine order, and what I see is the willingness for life to continue, whether your life continues or whether it doesn't. And I have to take my instruction from there. That's what you've been hearing from me. Not comfort, not consolation, some consternation, and a kind of wily willingness to have finally lived long enough to not require comfort as a prerequisite for discernment.
Stephen Jenkinson, thank you for being with us and being part of Uplift.
Pleasure.
Powerful words and exploration with Stephen Jenkinson, and it has really left me thoughtful about my own journey in life and how best to live fully with the consciousness that one day, for me and those I love the most, will die. So I hope that this episode has expanded your connection with this notion of befriending